Somewhere inside almost every ancient human who ever lived, something else was living too, quietly, for years at a time, without a single symptom ever being understood or named. Researchers studying ancient remains have found direct physical evidence of this in coprolites, meaning preserved ancient feces, and in the tissue of mummified remains, showing that intestinal parasites were not a rare misfortune in ancient life. They were closer to a near-universal condition, and the part that surprises people most is not that ancient humans had parasites. It is what their bodies and their communities quietly did about it without medicine, without a single idea of what a parasite even was. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how ancient humans lived alongside something most people today would find genuinely disturbing. If uncovering the hidden realities of how the human body actually survived before modern medicine existed is the kind of mystery that keeps pulling you in, this is exactly the territory this channel breaks down every single week. So staying nearby means the next one will not slip past you. Let's start with how common this actually was, because the scale of it tends to surprise people first. Archaeological studies analyzing preserved ancient waste and mummified remains across multiple regions and time periods have found eggs and physical traces of various intestinal parasites, including roundworms, tapeworms, and whipworms, in a striking percentage of samples examined. Some researchers studying these findings describe intestinal parasites as something close to a normal biological condition for most ancient humans, rather than an occasional unlucky infection the way it is often treated today. This makes complete sense once you consider the daily reality of ancient life. Meat was frequently eaten without any reliable way to fully cook away parasite larvae. Water sources were shared with animals and were not filtered or treated in any way. Waste disposal, sanitation, and hygiene practices we take completely for granted today simply did not exist in the same form. Every one of these conditions created a direct, repeated pathway for parasites to move from animals, water, and soil into the human body, over and over, for an entire lifetime. Here is where the story becomes genuinely strange, though. If this exposure was constant and unavoidable, how did ancient humans survive it well enough to keep hunting, gathering, reproducing, and building the entire foundation of human civilization for tens of thousands of years? The first part of the answer comes down to something the human body does automatically, without any conscious effort at all. The immune system, over generations of constant exposure, adapted to tolerate a certain baseline level of parasitic presence, without it becoming immediately fatal. This is not the same as being unaffected. Many parasites cause real, measurable harm over time, including nutrient depletion, chronic fatigue, and weakened resistance to other illnesses. But a body regularly exposed to the same parasites generation after generation often develops a kind of functional tolerance that keeps a low-level infection from becoming an immediate emergency the way an unfamiliar, first-time exposure might. Here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. If you knew, with total certainty, that something was quietly living inside you right now, and there was absolutely no way to remove it, do you think you could still function normally day to day? Type your honest answer in the comments. Because ancient humans may have had a strange, kind of practical acceptance most people today would struggle to imagine. The second part of the answer involves something researchers have found real evidence for, and it might be the most surprising piece of this entire story. Certain plants used across multiple ancient cultures, identified through both archaeological residue analysis and continued use in some traditional medicine practices today, contain natural compounds with documented antiparasitic properties. This does not mean ancient humans understood parasites the way modern science does. They almost certainly did not know what a parasite egg looked like, or how an infection actually spread inside the body. But through generations of observed trial and error, watching which plants seem to reduce certain symptoms, certain communities appear to have developed and passed down specific plant-based remedies that modern researchers have since confirmed do have a measurable effect against particular types of intestinal parasites. That detail deserves a moment of real appreciation. Without microscopes, without any concept of germ theory, without a single word for what a parasite actually was, some ancient communities managed to identify functional treatments through nothing more than patient, careful observation repeated across countless generations. None of this means ancient life handled the problem cleanly, and this next part is where the story becomes noticeably darker. Chronic parasitic infection, even at a tolerated baseline level, comes with a real biological cost. Parasites compete directly with their host for nutrients, which means a person carrying a significant parasite load was often working with less available nutrition than someone without one, even while eating exactly the same food. Researchers studying ancient skeletal remains have found evidence consistent with chronic nutrient deficiency in individuals believed to have carried heavy parasitic loads, including signs of stunted growth and weakened bone density. In a world where physical strength and stamina directly determined whether a person could hunt, gather, and keep up with the demands of daily survival, this was not a minor inconvenience. It was a constant, quiet drain working against every single ancient human's chances of survival. It is also worth pointing out that not every parasite behaved the same way inside the body, and ancient communities likely noticed at least some of these differences, even without any scientific framework to explain them. Certain intestinal parasites caused visible, unmistakable symptoms, including noticeable weight loss despite normal eating, visible fatigue, and in some cases physical evidence of the parasite itself. Other infections were far quieter, causing only mild, easily ignored symptoms for years while still quietly draining nutrients in the background. It is reasonable to think that the more visible, more disruptive infections were the ones most likely to prompt some kind of response, whether that meant trying a specific plant remedy, changing what someone ate, or simply recognizing that a particular person was unwell in a way the rest of the community had seen before. The quieter infections, by contrast, may have simply been absorbed into the ordinary background of ancient life, an accepted low hum of biological cost that nobody had any real way to identify or address directly. There is also the darker reality of what happened when infection levels moved beyond a tolerated baseline into something more severe. Heavy parasitic loads, particularly in children, could and likely did contribute to serious illness and death in a portion of ancient populations, especially in cases involving contaminated water sources or repeated exposure without any period of recovery in between. Modern researchers examining child remains from certain ancient sites have found evidence suggestive of parasite-related complications as a contributing factor in some cases of early death. Though scientists studying this area are careful to note that determining an exact cause of death from skeletal evidence alone comes with real limitations and uncertainty. If a story this layered and uncomfortable is holding your attention right now, that reaction is exactly why leaving a like on a video like this helps more people stumble onto the same kind of surprising history. So if it is doing that for you, this is a good moment to tap it. There is another angle worth exploring here, related to how ancient communities may have unintentionally reduced their own exposure through simple behavioral patterns, without ever understanding the biological reason why those patterns helped. Evidence from certain ancient sites suggests some communities regularly relocated their living areas, every so often rather than remaining permanently fixed in one location. Researchers studying this pattern have noted that periodic relocation would have had the practical side effect of moving people away from areas where waste and contamination had steadily built up over time, effectively resetting parasite exposure levels without anyone in the group ever knowing that was happening. It appears to have functioned as accidental sanitation, a survival behavior that likely emerged simply because staying too long in one place eventually became unpleasant or impractical for other reasons entirely. Yet it carried a hidden health benefit alongside it. Cooking practices likely played an unintentional protective role as well. While ancient methods of preparing meat were far less consistent and controlled than modern cooking, the simple act of exposing meat to sustained heat even imperfectly, would have killed off a meaningful portion of the parasite larvae that raw or undercooked meat could otherwise carry. Communities that regularly cooked meat over longer periods, even without any understanding of why, were likely reducing their parasite exposure simply as a side effect of a practice adopted for taste, texture, or tradition rather than any conscious health strategy. It is worth remembering, too, that ancient human experience with this issue was never identical across every population and every environment. Communities living near consistently flowing freshwater sources likely faced different parasite exposure levels, compared to communities relying on stagnant or shared water sources also used heavily by animal populations. Climate mattered as well, since many parasites and their eggs survive and spread more easily in warm, humid conditions compared to colder, drier environments. There was no single universal ancient experience with parasites, but rather countless different levels of exposure and different inherited coping strategies, shaped entirely by whatever specific environment a given community happened to call home. So here is the real answer to the question this video opened with. Ancient humans did not defeat intestinal parasites the way modern medicine can today. They lived alongside them, generation after generation, through a combination of gradually developed immune tolerance, some genuinely effective plant-based remedies discovered through patient trial and error, and a handful of everyday behavioral habits that reduced exposure almost entirely by accident. It came at a real and measurable cost, including chronic nutrient loss, in more severe cases, serious illness or death, particularly among the most vulnerable members of any given community. It was never a clean solution. It was a long, quiet, imperfect coexistence between the human body and something it could never fully see or understand, sustained only through generations of accumulated observation and an immune system slowly adapting to a threat it had no other choice but to learn to tolerate. If this uncovered something you did not expect, there is another question sitting right behind it that might be even harder to imagine living through. What actually happened to an ancient human the moment they lost their eyesight completely, in a world with no glasses, no surgery, and absolutely no way to correct the problem? That story is coming next, and it reveals something about ancient human adaptation that most people have never once stopped to consider, something that has far more to do with the senses working together than most people ever expect.